In the fall of 1971, a professor walked into a classroom at the University of Cincinnati and set his briefcase on the desk. He wrote a course number on the board. Aeronautical Engineering. He handed out a syllabus. He told the students there would be homework every week and that late work would not be accepted. Then he began to teach. The students knew who he was. He was 39 years old. 2 years earlier, he had been the first human being to stand on the moon. He did not mention this. He expected them to do the reading before class. Neil Armstrong resigned from NASA in 1971. He did not give a farewell speech. He did not do a retirement tour. He had completed the mission that all of it had been building toward, and now he was done. He moved back to Ohio. He taught. This is the story of the 43 years between Tranquility Base and a hospital in Cincinnati. Between the footprint in the lunar dust and the man who put it there, the man from Wapakoneta, Ohio, who went to the moon and then went home. It is, in a way, the end of the story this series has been telling from the beginning. The immediate aftermath of Apollo 11 had not been quiet. President Nixon gave Armstrong, Aldrin, and Collins the Presidential Medal of Freedom. They went on a world tour, 45 days, 22 countries, received in capital cities with a kind of attention that had never been given to any explorer before them and, in all likelihood, never will be again. In Seoul and Buenos Aires and Belgrade and Bombay, people who had watched the moon landing on television came to see the men who had been there. Armstrong stood in the receiving lines and shook hands and said what was required of him. He had always responded to letters personally, and for a time he continued to. The letters arrived by the thousands every week. He answered them with his own hand as long as he could. Eventually, he could not. He had gone to the moon. He had not consented to be a symbol forever. The distinction mattered to him. He resigned from NASA and moved back to Ohio. From 1971 to 1979, he was a professor of aerospace engineering at the University of Cincinnati. He had office hours. He graded papers. He was, by the accounts of those who took his courses, demanding and precise, a man who expected his students to know the mathematics before they arrived and to come prepared to use it. He was Dr. Armstrong in the classroom, and the moon was not a course requirement. His students, years later, described a man who was methodical and occasionally dry in his humor and entirely without performance. He did not tell moon stories in class. He did not decorate his office with lunar photographs. He had done what he had done. Now he was doing this. The order of those events was, to him, entirely logical. He served on the review board for Apollo 13 and later on the Rogers Commission examining the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster in 1986. In both cases, he brought to the work what he always brought: methodical analysis, an engineer's insistence on what the data actually said, and an absence of theater. After 1979, he moved into the private sector, company boards, an advisory role here, a directorship there. He was briefly a spokesman for Chrysler. He served as a director at AIL Systems for 25 years. He was quiet about all of it, and the quiet was deliberate. He moved to a farm outside Lebanon, Ohio. He grew things. He raised cattle for a time. He drove his own truck to the hardware store. He played golf. He went to the same barber in Lebanon about once a month, and sat in the chair and had his hair cut and was left alone, which was exactly what he wanted. His friends in Lebanon knew that he liked to be left alone, and they respected it. When a newspaper reporter tried to write about him in 1994 for the 25th anniversary of the moon landing, some of the people who knew him best declined to be interviewed. Not because they were hostile, but because they knew he wouldn't approve. One friend said it simply. This was what he liked about Lebanon. He could sit at a table and be left alone. Neil Armstrong had a particular relationship with his own name. It was not his to sell, and he knew it. He did not sign autographs for dealers. When MTV launched in 1981 and wanted to use his words, "one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," in its station identification, he refused. When Hallmark created a Christmas ornament using his call from the surface without asking his permission, he filed a lawsuit, and it settled. He was not motivated by money in either case. He was motivated by the belief that what he had said and done in July of 1969 had not been said and done for anyone's merchandise. In May of 2004, his barber in Lebanon, a man named Mark Sizemore, owner of Mark's Barber Shop, swept up the hair clippings from the floor after a haircut and sold them to a celebrity hair collector in Connecticut for $3,000. The collector was listed by Guinness World Records as having the largest collection of hair from historical figures in the world. The collection included strands from Abraham Lincoln, Marilyn Monroe, Albert Einstein, and Napoleon. Armstrong's clippings were added to the company. Armstrong sent a letter from his lawyer. The letter demanded either the return of the hair or the donation of $3,000 to charity. The collector, who had no desire to give back Abraham Lincoln's hair, much less an astronaut's, eventually donated the money to charity to avoid a lawsuit. The barber said he hadn't thought Armstrong would mind. The lawyer's letter suggested otherwise. Serious. On February 22, 2000, Armstrong gave a rare speech at the National Press Club in Washington. He was 69 years old. He had been asked, as he was always asked, to reflect on what it meant to have been the first. He said, in the precise way he said everything, that he had always been, and would always be, a White Sox, pocket protector, nerdy engineer. He was not being modest. He was being accurate, born under the second law of thermodynamics, he said, in love with free body diagrams. He had gone to space and come back and remained the same person he had been when he left. The moon had taken him somewhere extraordinary and returned him to himself, and himself was a man from Ohio who understood aerodynamics and did not particularly want his hair sold to collectors. He was divorced from Janet in 1994, after 38 years. He married Carol Held Knight that same year. He continued farming and working and saying almost nothing in public. He was, to those who observed him from any distance, the most private famous person in American history. Neil Armstrong died on August 25, 2012, in Cincinnati, Ohio. He was 81 years old. He had undergone coronary bypass surgery on August 7th, following complications discovered that summer. He never fully recovered from the surgery. He died in the city where he had taught, 50 miles from the farm where he had lived, and 80 miles from the town where he had been born. His family's statement asked that those who wished to honor him would look up and smile at the moon. That is what it said. Reflective. What he left behind was not a monument. He did not write a memoir. There was no foundation, no institute, no brand. He had left a footprint on the moon, 2 actually, and then several more during the moonwalk. And they are still there, in the fine gray dust of the Sea of Tranquility, preserved by the vacuum. No wind, no rain, no erosion. The boot print from July 20th, 1969 will be there in 10,000 years, in 1,000,000, unless something disturbs it, and nothing will. He left behind 47.5 pounds of lunar samples that scientists are still studying. He left behind a generation of engineers he had taught at the University of Cincinnati, who are now in their 70s and 80s and remember the professor who expected the reading to be done before class. He left behind, in the historical record, the voice of a man who kept his head at 1 revolution per second over the Pacific Ocean, and found flat ground in the Sea of Tranquility, with 30 seconds of fuel remaining, and never, not once, talked about any of it more than the moment required. And he left behind, in a cemetery in Wapakoneta, Ohio, a small white headstone with his daughter's name on it, Karen Ann Armstrong, January 1959 to January 1962. He left that there long before the moon. He carried it with him to the moon. He came home, and it was still there. This series began in Wapakoneta. It ends there, too. He was born 8 miles from that cemetery. He went everywhere a human being has ever been. He came back to Ohio and lived the rest of his life within an afternoon's drive of the place that made him. The scale of that, the distance traveled and the distance remained, is the whole story. He was a man from Ohio. He was, and ever will be, a White Sox, pocket protector, nerdy engineer. He was the first human being to stand on the moon. These 3 things were not in conflict. They were the same man. That was enough. If you have been with us since the beginning, since Karen's bracelet, since the spinning capsule, since the 4 seconds at Ellington, since the treaty and the fire, tell us in the comments what moment from this series has stayed with you, and subscribe. There will be more quiet legends. There always are.